Welcome to the Warships Podcast with your host, Kellorn, Venacera, and Aaron.
Hello and welcome to episode 104 of the Warships Podcast. We have a very special episode today as we cover Star Citizen's CitizenCon 2948 conference that took place yesterday here in Austin, Texas. For those of you who are our regular listeners, we will be covering Star Citizen today as a bit of a branch out from our normal topics that are related solely to World of Warships. So this is something new. If you guys, I hope that you guys will indulge us as we explore a completely different kind of warships. As Vanessa said, the ones that take place in space. So some quick background info for those who are not diehard Star Citizen fans. First announced in late 2011 on a stage in Austin, Texas, Star Citizen is an amalgamation of several different genres. Originally advertised as a straight space combat simulator, a kind of spiritual successor to beloved games like Wing Commander, X-Wing, TIE Fighter, and Privateer, Chris Roberts' crowdfunding campaign quickly blew past every goal they set and currently still climbing over $200 million that they have collected. This allowed a massive expansion of the game setting and scope, which has expanded it to include FPS shooter elements, capital ships, and true world building on a scale that really has never been seen before in a video game. In the interest of full disclosure, I was one of the original backers back in 2011. I've admired Chris Roberts' games over the years, being a fan of the Wing Commander games, especially Privateer. That said, after my initial backing, I've been sitting back with kind of a wait-and-see attitude. I've dabbled in the alpha versions, because I've had access to all of them due to my early backing, and I do enjoy flying the few ships that I do have access to. When CitizenCon was announced in Austin this year, I felt like there really wasn't a reason to avoid attending, so I purchased a ticket. Along the way, it occurred to me to wonder if you guys were interested in it as well, and putting the podcast together, it's put me into a more of a reporting type of experience than I really ever kind of anticipated. So as things got closer, I inquired about getting a press pass and was actually granted one and got press access yesterday, which was a very cool experience. As I said, yesterday was an interesting experience, and I can be a tad cynical at times, and seeing the mass crowds yesterday, literally from all over the world, it made me wonder if my cynicism was a bit misplaced. Having visited and talked to the World of Warships devs in St. Petersburg, I could tell that talking with the devs involved with Star Citizen, which is also a multinational development team, I could see that they believed in the project just as much as the Warships devs do. But that said, there was a difference there. There's an idealism that all the Star Citizen devs talked about, that they want to do this in the future type of thing. Whereas the World of Warships devs seem much more confident of their path. They have a working game. It is out. They're generating revenue for it, and they know they want to expand their game and move it forward. But it's less pie in the sky and more of a we're grounded and we know what we're doing type of thing. So what does all of this mean? The first thing I want to talk about is the final announcement and trailer for Squadron 42, the single-player portion of Star Citizen. With a star-studded cast, which included Gillian Anderson, Gary Oldman, Mark Hamill, Mark Strong, Henry Cavill, John Rhys-Davies, and others, the headline of Squadron 42 will be very much the story and throwback to the original Wing Commander games. More than that, they set expectations for Squadron 42 to be released in 2019 by informing us that there are no longer any technical barriers left for its implementation. This bringing my impressively long monologue here at the start of the show to an end. Vanessa, what does the upcoming release of Squadron 42 do to dampen the accusations of vaporware that have surrounded Star Citizen for several years now?
That's a really brilliant question. And I, too, have been backing Star Citizen since almost the beginning. Pretty early on backer, I bought the Retaliator kind of before we had any visuals or anything. And then I bought the Avenger, and then I bought pretty much every other Aegis.
And then.
Yeah. No, seriously, I have all the Aegis ships except for the Javelin and the Idris and the Hammerhead. Then I almost got the Hammerhead, and I would love the Idris P. But yeah, I'll just get those in game eventually. Our organization For those, some of you know, I am part of an organization called Black Widow Company, and it's been around since the days of PlanetSide. Some of our listeners know, big into PlanetSide, big into PlanetSide 2. And the organization that I'm with is very much into these large scale, heavily organized games. And so a lot of us were deep into Star Citizen as it came out, in concept and launch and form, and have been interested in backing it ever since then. And from my standpoint, I've never wavered on my support for this game. I know there's a lot of people out there who might, cry foul or cause pie in the sky or, whatever. And, that's their viewpoint. That's their understanding, and rightfully so. Some people back the game wanting Wing Commander. And they just wanted a modern Wing Commander or, one of my favorite games of all time, TIE Fighter. And I perfectly understand that. But for me, I know I am backing a vision, and I trust Chris Roberts because I've experienced his works of art, and I've watched the team. I know a lot of people in my organization have gotten firsthand early access to some of the things that they were doing. And, I look at it as support and investment. And to me, it's not just a game. I am supporting a new type of technology that's being developed, and it's really a universe. Chris and his team, they are building a universe for us to live and enjoy in virtually. And I look at it as the bigger picture. So I, I don't have to have something that I've got hands on and I'm playing right now. Though for many of us, you can go and you can quite enjoy some of the stuff that Star Citizen has to offer right now. And I don't know if you watched, kind of the keynote and some of the stuffs that they're rolling out with 3.3 and the ability, just the mission that they did showing on Hurston alone the other day was just brilliant. And, you're going to be able to play and enjoy stuff now if you really want to do that.
So going from Vanessa, the true believer, Aaron, to you, who really weren't all that familiar with Star Citizen at all until we started talking about it here on the show, limiting it to the Squadron 42 trailer and talking about the single player aspect of this game before we get into the larger aspect of Star Citizen as a whole. Was the trailer that you watched exciting for someone that wasn't into it before this?
Well, that's not quite true. I knew Star Citizen pretty much the moment I think it was Kickstarter, right? The Kickstarter campaign started.
Yeah.
But I haven't really, it seemed interesting, but as usual with all the Kickstarter projects, it was like, well, what you're saying is cool and all, but I'm not really feeling any of the stuff that you've made so far. And I'm usually not wanting to buy into promises like that. While the idea is really cool, I enjoy space stuff. KSP is one of my favorite games. That it's just fun, and I like realistic space. I enjoy seeing what EVE Online, what happens in EVE Online, and I have, dabbled in game development here and there, and I've looked into engines. So what Star Citizen planned was really exciting to me, especially to watch, because the whole thing looks amazing, and what they have achieved is definitely amazing so far. But I'm kind of unsure about the actual gameplay stuff, because while it's really, really impressive to look at, what's the gameplay going to be like? Is it actually going to be fun? Because usually when game developers make a game, the most important thing is to figure out a fun gameplay loop. All the other stuff is basically secondary. And in this case, it seems kind of like the opposite is going on. All the other stuff is done first, and then they'll look into making the game. But as you did say earlier, it does make some sense that they are making it into basically multi-genre, where you have an FPS and, well, other stuff other genres of games too. So it could be that they can polish those, and so a person can pick whichever they like the most.
Yeah, I guess what I'm the portion of this the single player game that it interests me is the ability to tell a story in a way that you can't really do in kind of more of an MMO type of setting. The story that they appear to be trying to tell in the Squadron 42 is an kind of an epic storyline of the type that you never really could get the sense of in games like Wing Commander and TIE Fighter and X-Wing. They tried, but the technology wasn't there to give you that level of immersion. So, it almost is like a combination of playing a game, reading a visual novel, and watching a movie. Are these genres of like entertainment, are they starting to blend for you guys as much as it seems like they're trying to blend them, or is it there's still a disconnect for you in terms of how you enjoy entertainment?
I love the idea because I have been somebody that basically played pen and paper games even a long time ago, RPGs, where basically anything was possible. You had a world where anything was possible. You couldn't really have expectations that, hey, I know I can't go in this one direction a long time because it's a video game. So in a video game, we can't have worlds that are this large. If I run into a forest in an RPG, I can basically go through every inch of that forest within like 5 to 10 minutes because forests just aren't big. Even if the technology allows it, game design usually makes it so that this isn't possible. But with pen and paper RPGs, if your dungeon master didn't care, or game master didn't really care much about trying to push the story on the railroad, if you ran into a forest unprepared, you're going to stay in that forest for a very long time. And, it'll be fun to try out all those things because anything is possible. You can make a story out of anything. And I think that the world that Star Citizen is trying to paint is a world that reminds me of pen and paper games because it has the massive scale that gives you the immersion that, well, anything is possible. You can go in one direction for a while.
It's actually funny that you say that, Arun, because they actually made a specific point in one of their videos that they released yesterday. I believe it's called Into the Verse, that one of the big influences for the staff is pen and paper RPGs. They actually showed them that said that they play them after hours at the office, that they have gaming groups and things like that, which I think is reflected in the game design. The elements that you're talking about.
I mean, it is basically the holy grail that video games would like to get to because you can make any game out of that. And I think it has kind of gotten lost for video games for a while because game developers seem to have made games for a while that were mostly just the game part. It was, this gameplay mechanic is fun, so let's add it. It doesn't matter like what the immersive quality of that mechanic is. And I really like it that some developers are coming back to, well, make things more immersive.
What about you, Vanessa? Did you feel a sense of immersion and like watching a movie type of thing will be a part of the gameplay of something like Squadron 42?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Chris Roberts took a break from video gaming to make movies. So it's not like, this is some strange concept to him. Like he really is into that part of storytelling as well. And then, you throw the actors in there that he's got in there and it's just, it's just an extension. It's like he's doing something that he's always wanted to do. And now he has the technology to do it. And, if the technology is not necessarily there, they're inventing it and making it. And it's just like, it really is cool to see what they're doing, pushing the boundaries to make this universe actually come alive.
So if Squadron 42 is the equivalent of Wing Commander, the full Star Citizen game is the kind of free-form sandbox of Privateer combined with action MMO gameplay of something like Destiny, albeit kind of more lightweight than that in terms of the way that Destiny's set up. During the keynote demonstration, they showed a fully realized world, complete with normal day-to-day actions like drinking coffee, getting dressed, and taking the train. But more than that, the world was seamless and functionally limitless. They managed to show a fully rendered city, planet, and airspace, all without loading screens. The scale of the thing was literally would take my breath away. The world they show was not a matte painting of background with artificial gating. I mean, there are things like in something like Destiny where you have this gorgeous scenery, but you can't actually get there. It's just a background element. There was no background element here. Everything appeared to be you able to to go there wherever you wanted to go. It was very free form. So and it wasn't even the 16 kilometer by 16 kilometer planets of Star Wars Galaxies that did and do feel enormous to run around in to this day if you play on the Galaxies emulator. But no, this planet was 2,300 kilometers in diameter with hundreds of kilometers of terrain in every direction. The concern here is just how do you make a universe this big? They said that this is their first full planet, and but this gets crazy really, really quickly. So, if you have, so let's say you have 30 star systems, I think is what they're going for, something like that, 30, 40 star systems that each have 2 or 3 planets of this scale that you have to render. They've done one. The game has been in development for 7 years. They've done one. So how do you scale this? How do you take a world like this and make more of them without it taking you the 3 or 4 years that it took you to make this one? And, how do you put like the level of fidelity into each of these to make them feel unique and not wrong? I mean, I did watch a very good panel from the art director about how they were very meticulous about making things that looked and felt natural. My question, and which I didn't get a chance to ask to the art guys, is how do you scale that? How do you make a universe out of something like this? Now, Arun, I know that you are more interested in kind of the technology that makes something like this possible. What doors does this open for you as a gamer to see something like this?
Well, to be completely fair, it's not like what they're doing is completely revolutionary. This stuff has been done several times before. The scale might be bigger this time, but I mean, I'm sure there are examples where people have made so-called infinite scale as well, because all you really have to do is make load stuff in and out so that in the background without, affecting the actual gameplay and having these crossover zones. And I mean, we've seen examples of that a long time ago. I mean, you even have online games. Lineage 2, for example, was a game without loading screens with a very large world, like World of Warcraft large, if you haven't played Lineage yourself, without loading screens. So, you didn't when you sat on the boat on an island and sailed to the continent, there was no loading screen in between, like in World of Warcraft. And that game is older than World of Warcraft and looks, I would say, as good, if not better. So the technology was there. I mean, it was possible, but it's just really, really, really difficult to implement. And they have done that. I would say that what the harder question is what you asked earlier about how to populate that world. Because while it might be possible to create the world so that everything loads, you might even be able to make it feel natural. But the question is, how can you make it unique or interesting? Because you could use a computer algorithm to try to fill in a lot of the, pieces and parts, which would make sense because the real world kind of does work like that. There isn't everything, you don't throw a stone 5 meters in one direction and then stumble upon something interesting there like you do in most video games. So in that sense, it would make sense. But on the other hand, if you have a very large world like that doesn't have anything unique in it, it becomes kind of boring. One of the Elder Scrolls games that had a really large procedural world, I think a big criticism for that one was that basically the world felt empty because it was procedurally generated. Now, they might be able to figure out some good way to fill it in, but there is still the worry that it might just not be interesting enough. On the other hand, I think they can make it fairly quickly, because the first one is going to take a while, the first planet to implement, because you have to figure out all the technology stuff, etc. But once you've done that, then the rest of that stuff is mostly for the art and design guys, who just have to figure out how and where to put stuff to make it seem interesting. So I think it's definitely possible for them to fill it in fairly quickly, but I think it'll still take a few years.
Well, wasn't it the previous Citizen Con that they showed off their technology for procedurally generating planets and stuff? Like they had like how they had it, kind of make trees and make water, and though it may have been the previous one where they actually showed jumping to a different planet all within real time, no loading, as well as was it maybe the ArcCorp, where they were showing off like, this is the planet, like a huge city-sized planet. I think it might have been the last one, but they showed off part of their procedurally generating tech that actually goes in and starts to do a lot of this. And so it would just be a matter of getting that pipeline to just more refined to, okay, here is the base. And then, start to branch off the base and use this as kind of the template.
Yeah, I think that's going to have to be the way that they go about it. The panel that I sat in on for talking about the world, talking about Hurston, they actually went into enormous depth, and I think you can actually watch it on the live stream if you are interested in kind of how they did it. But they talked about just how many elements are there in each one. So you've got, they talk about how, color scaling and so that things look natural. They talked about, environmental effects. I mean, they talk about how the wind blows through each thing, and how they can have dynamic weather eventually by having limits up and down of where it can be and letting it be random between those. So for me, the immersion aspect of getting to, sit in a world and, you fly to somewhere random and you land and it's a full fidelity world, that part of it just really got to me, that, you can have that level of immersion on a game that, it was supposed to be like, I was sitting there and I actually tweeted this out yesterday, is I thought we were playing a space game, and here we are, and you're looking at just, okay, this is, you're looking at a world where I feel like I'm walking through a savanna. That to me is beyond the expectations of what I originally backed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I kind of got the perspective early on that Chris is building a universe, and it's more than just kind of a game. And then I know that's going to put off a lot of people, but I kind of picked that up from the group, and this is something bigger than just a space sim, which I would love a modern TIE fighter, a modern wing commander, but I get that they have the technology and the resources and the backing now to make something that's just really incredible to be a part of.
So I guess what's the expectation for you, Arun? Like what's next? Like how do you look at this and say, okay, is there going to be a game here?
Well, I mean, there definitely is going to be a game. There could even be many games, and everything depends. Well, not everything. A lot depends on what they want to do with it, because there's definitely a lot of options they can do with the games. I mean, one of the biggest things that I have found to be kind of disappointing with many games is that art assets that are, for example, in World of Warships, it's the ships, the shells exploding, the water. All of that takes a huge amount of effort, and you could make many different games with those art assets. But usually with games, you only get that one specific game. When you had Warcraft 3, you only got Warcraft 3 from those art assets. The fact that it had a custom map designer, that made it possible for games such as Dota to be made and all those other custom games. But all of that was basically a secondary aspect of it. I think in Star Citizen, it might be more likely that we will get different types of games based on those assets and worlds than just the few games that they have mentioned so far. And I think it would fit very well to a world that's on a very large scale because, well, you would expect there to be different genres there. Maybe we'll eventually even see an RTS.
So I want to move into a little bit more of a detail oriented on, specific game aspects. I actually got a chance to talk to one of the head of the in-flight control systems, IFCS. And his name is David Coulson, and actually I'm going to play a little clip from him in just a second. But in an important upcoming patch, there will be, and I believe it's 3.3, there will be adding an optimization pass of the flight physics, but it also adds aerodynamics for in-atmosphere flight, which clearly differentiates the space type of flight and the atmospheric type of flight. So let's listen to David Coulson here as he talked to me a little bit before his demo.
Coulson. I'm the gameplay programmer working on IFCS. We've made quite a few changes to the ship systems and the ship handling. We're going to go into a lot of detail in the flight experience panel.
Okay.
So I don't want to give all the secrets away, right? But we've rebalanced all of the ships and retuned them for a sort of more systemic, more believable flight model, so you can kind of feel the ship a bit more.
Okay.
And on top of that, we've done a lot of work to the underlying system so that we can kind of integrate it deeper with the ship's internal systems like the power plant and the fuel and everything, so that the way that we draw power and the way that you can sort of modify the power distribution of the ship is like brand new, and it's really, really systemic and really integrated with the rest of the ship. And so the idea is that you can sort of fine-tune your ship and control how the thrusters are getting their power and their fuel, and you will feel that in the way the ship is handling. You'll get something kind of different out of that, right?
And you were talking to a couple of the gentlemen about the ESP system. You were talking about there were some pretty big changes made to that. Can you go into a little bit of that?
So we actually haven't made too many changes yet to ESP. What you've got here is pretty much a retuned ESP from 3.3 and 3.2. There hasn't been any changes to the actual mechanics of how it works. Okay. But the difference is, because the ships have been retuned, you get a different experience when it comes to time on target, which makes ESP feel better, even though ESP hasn't actually changed that much. But I'm still not done, there's still a few months before 3.4, and I think we can do better with ESP, and we can try and make that experience a little bit nicer so that it's helping you a bit more. I think maybe it's a bit weak today. So we can do better, and we can try and make that a bit nicer.
So what's the next step for your team?
The next step for our team right now is on the immediate future is to get ready for 3.4. Like, this is obviously coming out in 3.4, and there's a lot of work to try and get that up to scratch. We also want to work on the Gravlev bikes a bit more. The hover bikes, I want them to feel a little bit tighter, a little bit more visceral, because I think right now they're a little bit too floaty, and so that we want to rebalance that and retune that to just nail down that experience and make it really, really fun, and obviously integrate it with all the other ship systems like the power and the heat and stuff like that.
So I guess what would be your biggest challenge that you see with the current version that they're testing right now?
I think the biggest challenge is pleasing the different groups of players, right? Because the different groups of players have these different wants out of how they want to fly, right? There's some people who want like these huge main thrusters where they can have like World War II in space, or like flying behind the target. And there's other players who want like super strong 6 degrees of freedom where their maneuver thrusters are just as strong as their mains. And we want to find a balance where as many people as possible are happy with how the ships feel, and for sure that is absolutely the hardest thing.
So in terms of that, are you looking at something that's more of a one-size-fits-all, or do you think there's more customization where players can tune the power to their thrusters compared to the main?
It's both, right? It's both for sure. I think the base experience that most people get when they boot up the game, that should please the most people possible, right? But then if you want to change the experience, you can absolutely do that. And I think the more experienced players who are spending a bit more time with the game are the ones who are going to get the most out of changing the ship balance. And for everyone else who is not going to go into that much depth, their experience also needs to be really, really good.
Fair enough. Well, thank you very much, David.
No problem.
Take care.
Nice for the chat.
So, Vanessa, the feel of flight in a game like this is paramount. And so listening to David, what aspects are you kind of more encouraged about, and what still worries you about the flight aspects of this game?
Well, I mean, I feel this is something that he will get right, and this is probably something where, maybe gameplay will take precedence a little bit more. I mean, we've seen that a bit with their space stuff, because they went very hardcore with the, very much Newtonian physics. And then they did kind of back off a little bit for the sake of gameplay. So I fully expect them to kind of do the same and kind of look at it and come at it from, we want to make sure that all of this handles is fun. Because at the end of the day, realistically, you'd just have computers fly, especially in that time period, more or less. But, we want people actually having fun and enjoying it. And that's why, you have people controlling spaceships. And I'm very confident that, in 3.4 or 3.5, when they do get that implemented, that what we will get our hands on will still be fun.
Arun, was there anything that stood out to you about kind of what the from what David said, especially about the idea of that there is multiple levels that you can play the game on? That you have kind of the one size fits all version that it ships with, and then the sub layer that makes things that can make things more individual.
I think it's a great idea, but I think it'll be difficult to balance what you want to have in terms of power that players have available and what is fun. Because when you give people the option to customize, it usually ends up that some players will get the absolute. I guess it depends. It might very well end up being that there is no difference in power, and it's just personal preference. That's ideal, but it isn't always the case. Usually, some aspect takes over and becomes the most important aspect. I can't really give any good examples right now, but I think it's very good that they have a person or even a team that specifically looks out for that one aspect, because it is definitely one of the most important parts. And because right now it's not even the physics, it's the way the crafts operate in that physics. So I think it's encouraging that they are putting this much effort into making that part feel good, because it'll definitely be probably the most important part in an actual game.
So David, after he talked to me, then I went to see his panel, and that's where he talked about adding in the atmospheric flight and the fact that they were adding aerolift to the all the surfaces, and they simulated the aerodynamics. Now we're back into the idea that there's multiple games here, everyone. We've got the space simulator that flies one way, and then you have we're back to the old flight sims that we you play, military flight sims. How do you keep that straight? They showed one ship that was relatively aerodynamic, and it had lots of aerolift and could do cool things, and then they showed another ship that is literally a flying brick, and then you have it literally handled like one and wouldn't fly in atmosphere very well at all. So, are there multiple levels of gameplay, and is that a good thing, or is it too much complexity?
I actually don't think this is multiple levels of gameplay. I think this is one, at least from what I can understand. You can have space combat there, right? Just to ask. Or
yes,
at least
you can have combat in air, in atmosphere and out.
So isn't this like, you pick a ship and then play to its strengths? If it's very good at fighting in the atmosphere, but can still go into space, you fight in the atmosphere. And a ship that's very good at fighting in space can't really follow after them. And then you might have something in between that's decent at both of them. I think that's more about player choice, and I think that's a great idea.
Vanessa, how about you? Does the idea of the aero combat excite you as much as the space combat?
As someone who has invested heavily into Aegis, and a lot of their ships have aerodynamic surfaces, yes.
And you are a fan of the old, what is it, the Combat Ace series? from the game?
Briefly play it, but I mean, I've played everything from Microsoft Combat Flight Simulator to one of my favorite Jet Fighter 2. I don't know if I mentioned I have been building retro computers. I just built a 486 DOS computer, just really so that I could finally have and utilize a Sound Blaster AW32 and Ascend ET6000. And it also got me to building a Windows 98 computer, and I just built one that's utilizing a Voodoo 5. So yeah, I am very much retro gamer. I play a lot of old games. I have a ton of flight simulators. I grew up on flight simulators. It is, I work for Delta Airlines. Like, I freaking love anything space and flight, and it's my dream and passion. So yeah.
Wait, you do? So you love carriers?
Yeah, actually, I do like carriers.
I mean, in
She might
World
be
of
the only one
Warships?
in World of Warships.
Oh.
No, even in World of Warships, despite being a destroyer main and getting harassed by carriers, I actually played carriers quite a bit in beta and early on in the game. It's just regretfully my skill level, and yes, I do play a lot of RTS. I love a lot of RTS, but the way that they're implemented in the game right now, if my skill level is deficient in what you're going up against, then you really kind of hamper the team, and I don't want to hamper our team. And so that's why I really don't play carriers that much. But, as we're, the RTS style carrier gameplay, those days are waning. I honestly might play it a little bit more just to enjoy that level or that type of gameplay before it goes away.
Just to go back to the earlier topic about the fighting in the atmosphere and in space, I think actually the transition between atmospheric and space flight is probably the most interesting part about any spacecraft, other than litho braking, of course. I mean, at least from Kerbal Space Program, it was the most interesting part, in my opinion.
Well, one of the things that I was curious about, Aaron, and I'm glad you brought that up, is that they had to go a significant distance to get to the mission on Hurston, right, Vanessa? And I was wondering, well, why don't we go?
Mhm.
Why don't you take a suborbital flight? A suborbital flight, if you do it right, would be significantly faster, depending on the distance traveled. So I'm curious will there be times where going into a suborbit and then coming back down makes more sense than just flying directly there?
Hopefully.
Well, I mean, I guess that's the beauty of it, because you have options. You can, it might be a stealthier option to approach, low and slow.
Yeah, we'll have to see how that works out and how they kind of handle that stuff. So we close, as CitizenCon did, with the road to release for Star Citizen. Several major technical hurdles still exist before the game's full release, including persistent asset management and server clustering and merging, which they talked about a little bit last night before they closed out, or specifically Chris Roberts did. Yet we were given the distinct impression that the game will be released in stages, kind of one by one, bit by bit. And, we have the current alpha test client that has the quote unquote persistent universe that they've slowly been adding more and more and more and more into. And, as 3.3 gets and 3.35 get released, you're going to see Hurston and that whole aspect that we saw during the demo today get added to the game. But is that satisfying enough? Is it enough to get a game piece by piece, or do you need enough content to say this is our game before, and this is what we're releasing before you actually call it a game? So, in comparison to World of Warships, when World of Warships, we got, we had betas and there was a certain amount of content that went into the game and it launched. And then they've been slowly adding more and more content to it. Where is that line for Star Citizen?
Well, I mean, I guess that's, the 10 million or however many dollar question. I mean, it's continually in development, and I don't think this is something that's ever going to be finished, per se. Yes, we're going to start to get systems online. We're going to start to play the game, to, be in the universe. And again, I always stress that, you're going to be in the universe. And I think for some people that might be too big of a concept, too big of something to grasp. And honestly, it may not be for you. If you can't live in that universe and make some semblance of gameplay and something that you enjoy out of it, then Star Citizen is probably not going to be for you.
Well,
Or maybe you're going to do the Squadron 42 and you'll enjoy that and, move on from there. But for many of us, this is Second Life, but in space with an actual structured universe that is quite frankly amazing.
And it's funny that you bring up Second Life, because that's exactly what I was going to try and interrupt you a minute ago to ask you about, is that that was what the demo felt. Is like, okay, are we making is this like just Second Life in space? And
that's what I've been saying for years now. This is going to be Second Life in space. And I believe, in the concept, I see what they're doing. And, for those backers who backed and just wanted Squadron 42, I can understand their frustration. But there's an opportunity here that they can make something more. And yes, I want to support that, because I am tired of game developers like Electronic Arts going out there, or Activision giving us the same Call of Duty every year, the same, you could call it whatever, but the video game industry has been so marginalized into a formula of, well, this is what generates money, and this is what we have to, hash out every single year. And instead of actually, trying something different and trying to be inventive. And for me, that is why I back Star Citizen, because I want to give a big middle finger to people like EA and Activision. And, I want this to succeed. If it takes a little while, then that's fine. I can actually look at the project and understand what's going on. And again, it's not for everyone. I can totally see people's points who, hey, I just wanted Squadron 42. I just wanted a single player, and I'm out. And I totally get that. But there's a chance for something bigger and something more here.
Aaron, how about you? Do you have any final thoughts before we close it down for the week?
I thought the comment about it being Second Life in space is interesting. Second Life is, you could consider it somewhat like an MMO RPG. Well, not quite, but something along those lines. And the earlier comments about living in that world, it reminded me of something that somebody told me a really long time ago. I don't remember which MMORPG it was in, but they basically said that MMORPGs are basically MySpace in game mode. And I guess it might be true if you do spend a huge amount of time on it.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about old Star Wars Galaxies before, the combat upgrade, and there were definitely parts of EverQuest that have been touching along those lines. EVE is a great example of a living, breathing universe that has changed and evolved over time. But you have all of these kind of concepts coming together to actually make something bigger.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of, one of the really kind of cool things for me about Star Citizen is that there's a lot of crossover between different game types. I mean, even people that play a game like World of Warships can see aspects of that in Star Citizen, and it's a bit of a stretch. But I mean, Star Citizen is intends to have capital ship types of gameplay, and capital ships in space, which is, not something that we've seen capital ship types of battle in space before, but in more of an RTS type of mode. And that's not what they're going for here. And I think that allows people to get into it that, might be interested in the MMO aspects of it. They might be interested in the trading aspects of it. They might be interested in the economy aspects of it, because there's a huge economy here that has to be part of this, or it just doesn't work.
So one of the reasons why I picked up the Retaliator, and in my original backing, there was a concept in there where they talked about, here's an iconic ship, kind of like the B-17 post World War II, and how a lot of those B-17s were actually adapted and used for passenger service for airlines. And I thought that was so cool. It's like, hey, I could take this really iconic looking bomber and turn it into a passenger, space transport, and kind of run my own passenger transport, apparatus, if you will. And I love the logistics, idea behind that. One of, when I played PlanetSide heavily and PlanetSide 2, one of my biggest things in the game, but wasn't actually fighting, but it was delivering and getting logistics to, our front lines, whether that was taking the Lodestar and loading it up and getting key vehicles and equipment to, where we needed them to be, to, doing the craziest, hot drop. I'm not the best at first person shooters, but was okay at getting people to, the heaviest fighting and getting those who are really good at first person shooters delivered to a location where they could just go to town. And
so you really want that Valkyrie is what you're saying.
Yeah. The Valkyrie is pretty cool. I'm not going to lie, that actually is a pretty cool ship. But the point being is that for someone, for me, who likes logistics, who likes the idea, in Eve, I spent a lot of time just freightering stuff around for people. And I thought that was so cool. That was so thrilling to know that, these people are fighting, but they can't fight if I don't deliver the goods, to where they need to be. Like, none of that can happen at all without people like me. And that's just, I find that so enjoyable. So, there's going to be something for everyone. I know there's going to be economy people who just sit there and go to town on the economy, and they're going to love it.
Yeah, that just the depth of the gameplay is really one of the aspects of Star Citizen that makes me the most interested. Well, that's it for this week, folks. I do want to remind you next week we'll probably be talking about testing CVs and things, I hope. So do tune in for that as we get back to our normal World of Warships type of content. Thank you very much for indulging us in our Star Citizen focused episode, and we will see you next week.